out of the dead silence, came a sound that made every hair on my arms stand straight up. 3 sharp, distinct knocks on the solid wood front door. I froze. I was miles away from anyone. Nobody knew I was here. Story 1. The Company Store. My name is Alex. I've always been obsessed with ruin porn, the aesthetic of photographing abandoned, decaying buildings. In 2026, I took a solo road trip down to McDowell County, West Virginia. I had found an old coal camp on an obscure internet forum. It had been completely abandoned since the early 90s. The forum post said the old company store and the mine superintendent's mansion were still standing, swallowed by the forest. I parked my Subaru on the shoulder of a state highway, grabbed my camera bag, and hiked about 2 miles through the dense Appalachian woods until I hit the rusted railroad tracks that led into the valley. When the town came into view, it was breathtaking. It was a literal ghost town trapped in time. The old wooden company houses were collapsing under the weight of overgrown ivy and rhododendrons. The massive brick structure of the company store loomed at the end of the street, its windows blown out, looking like a rotting castle. For the first 4 hours, I was in heaven. The autumn sunlight was streaming through the trees, casting these incredible shadows across the rusted mining equipment. I explored the houses, snapping pictures of peeling wallpaper, old glass bottles, and the beautiful, quiet decay of it all. It was peaceful. I had the entire valley completely to myself. Or so I thought. Around 3 p.m., I decided to tackle the company store. It was a 3-story brick behemoth. As I walked up the cracked concrete steps, I noticed the first thing that was off. There was a fresh, muddy boot print on the landing. Not an old, dried print. Fresh, wet mud. I brushed it off. I figured another urban explorer, or maybe a local hunter, had passed through recently. I walked inside. The main floor was massive and dark. The smell was the second red flag. Abandoned buildings smell like dust, mold, and wet wood. But the back corner of this room smelled strongly of harsh chemicals, like ammonia and burnt plastic, mixed with the unmistakable stench of unwashed human bodies. I walked toward the back stairwell, leading to the basement. Lying on the floor next to the stairs was a perfectly clean, brand new sleeping bag, surrounded by dozens of empty pseudoephedrine blister packs and stripped copper wire. Now, I watch true crime. I know the reputation of rural, economically depressed areas. I knew exactly what I was looking at. This was a squatter's nest, and likely a makeshift meth lab. The smartest, most logical thing for a guy in his 20s carrying $3,000 worth of camera gear to do would be to turn around, walk silently out the front door, and hike back to his car. Instead, I looked at my watch. It was 3:30. The golden hour for photography was approaching. I told myself, the sleeping bag is empty. Whoever is doing this probably only comes here at night. I just want to get up to the second floor, get a few shots of the valley from the balcony, and then I'll leave. That single, arrogant, dangerously stupid decision almost cost me my life. I crept up the wooden stairs to the second floor. The floorboards creaked violently under my weight. I made it to the old manager's office overlooking the valley. I set up my tripod and started snapping photos as the sun began to dip behind the mountain ridge, casting the town in a deep, fiery orange light. I was so focused on adjusting my exposure settings that I didn't hear the sound of an engine until it was cut off. I froze, pulling away from the viewfinder. Down below, partially hidden by the trees, a rusted, heavily dented pickup truck had rolled up to the front of the company store. 3 men got out. They were wearing filthy clothes, and even from the second floor they looked rough, gaunt, and completely erratic. One of them was carrying a heavy hunting rifle. Another had a crowbar. They walked into the building directly beneath me. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I was trapped on the second floor of a building with a single wooden staircase, and heavily armed criminals had just walked into the ground floor. I carefully unclipped my camera from the tripod, leaving the tripod behind to avoid making noise. I pressed my back against the brick wall of the office, holding my breath. Below me, I could hear them talking. Their voices were loud, fast, and aggressive. "I'm telling you, I saw a car on the highway," one voice rasped. "So what? Probably just some hiker," another replied. "If it's a hiker, they're out here. Check the perimeter. I'm going downstairs to check the cook." I heard heavy boots walking across the wooden floorboards directly beneath me. Then, a terrifying sound. Someone was walking up the stairs. Panic completely overrode my brain. I looked around the manager's office. There was nowhere to hide. Just an empty, rotting wooden desk. I crept toward the doorway, peering out into the long, dark hallway of the second floor. The staircase was at the far end. The heavy thud of boots was getting closer. I made a split-second decision. I ducked out of the office and slipped into the room directly across the hall. It was an old bathroom. I crouched inside an empty, rusted cast-iron bathtub and pulled a piece of rotted drywall over my body. The footsteps reached the top of the landing. "Hello?" a voice called out. It wasn't friendly. It was a taunt. "I smell expensive cologne. You ain't from around here, buddy." My hands were shaking so violently, I had to grip my camera to my chest just to stop it from rattling. The man started walking down the hallway, kicking doors open. A door hit the wall. Another one. He was getting closer to the bathroom. "We don't like tourists," the voice chuckled, a sickening, phlegmy sound. "Especially not tourists who see things they shouldn't." He kicked open the door to the manager's office I had just vacated. I heard him stop. Well, look what we have here. Nice tripod." He knew I was on the floor. He knew I hadn't gone far. He stepped out of the office and turned toward the bathroom. I saw his shadow fall across the doorway. He stepped inside. I closed my eyes, waiting for the gunshot. Suddenly, from outside the building, one of the other men yelled, "Hey, Dale, get down here. Cops on the scanner." The man in the bathroom paused. He cursed under his breath, turned on his heel, and sprinted back down the hallway, his heavy boots pounding on the wooden stairs. I didn't move for an entire hour. I stayed crouched in that rusted bathtub as the sun set completely, plunging the abandoned building into absolute pitch black. I heard their truck engine start, rev violently, and tear off down the dirt path. When I finally gathered the courage to move, my legs were entirely numb. I used my phone's flashlight, aiming it directly at the floor, and crept down the stairs. The smell of the chemicals in the basement was overpowering now. I slipped out the front door and ran. I didn't hike. I sprinted through the dark Appalachian woods, tearing my clothes on briars and stumbling over roots until I finally saw the reflection of my Subaru on the highway. I threw my gear in the passenger seat and sped off, pushing the car to 80 miles an hour on a winding mountain road until I reached a town with a gas station and a police presence. I reported what I saw. The local cops told me I was the luckiest idiot they had met all year. Those guys were part of a violent, organized theft and narcotics ring operating out of the abandoned camps. If that police scanner hadn't gone off, I wouldn't have just been robbed. I would have been thrown down a 100-foot unmapped mine shaft where no one would ever find me. I still take photos, but I stick to the city now. The woods are beautiful, but in coal country, the desperation in the shadows is far more dangerous than the dark. Alex made the ultimate urban explorer mistake. He saw a fresh squatter's nest and decided his photography was more important than his safety. I have to ask you guys, if you walked into an abandoned building and smelled strong chemicals and saw a fresh sleeping bag? Would you have crept upstairs to take a picture or immediately bolted for your car? Drop a comment right now and tell me your survival strategy, because I read every single one. While you're down there, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to Creepy Digest. Now, let's get into our second story and find out why you should never trust a hand-painted detour sign. Story 2. The Holler Detour. I'm Sarah. I work as a county property appraiser. In 2026, Eastern Kentucky was dealing with a massive wave of foreclosures. Big swaths of land, old family farms, and deep woods properties were being reclaimed by the banks, and it was my job to drive out, photograph the structures, and assess their value. It's a depressing job, seeing people's lost livelihoods, but it pays the bills. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November. The sky was an unbroken sheet of gray, and the trees were completely stripped of their leaves. I was driving my county-issued Ford Escape out to a remote parcel of land near the West Virginia border. I had the heat blasting, a true crime podcast playing, and a massive mug of coffee. I was driving down a winding, two-lane state road. It was stunningly remote. I hadn't passed another car in over 40 minutes. The mountains rose up sharply on either side of the road, covered in jagged rock faces and dead timber. My GPS told me the property was about 10 miles straight ahead. I was perfectly content. I do this every day. Then, my podcast cut out. I glanced down at my phone mounted on the dashboard. No service. Standard for this area, which is why I had pre-downloaded the map. I kept driving. About 2 miles later, as I rounded a sharp bend, I was forced to slam on my brakes. Blocking the entire two-lane road was a massive, ancient oak tree that had seemingly fallen from the ridge above. It was impassable. But right in front of the tree, planted into the muddy shoulder, was a hand-painted wooden sign. It had an arrow pointing to a narrow, unpaved dirt road that branched off into the deep woods. Under the arrow, smeared in black paint, was the word detour. I stopped the car. The dirt road looked awful. It was steep, rutted, and disappeared into a dense canopy of trees. Any sane person would have put the car in reverse, driven 40 minutes back to civilization, found a diner with Wi-Fi, and called the county road department to report the blockage. But I was tired. It was 3:30 p.m. The property was only a few miles away, and I just wanted to get the appraisal over with so I could go home and feed my cat. I made the incredibly stupid decision to trust a hand-painted sign in the middle of nowhere. I turned the steering wheel and guided the Ford Escape onto the dirt road. The moment the tires hit the mud, the atmosphere changed. The trees were so thick they blocked out whatever little ambient light was coming from the gray sky. It felt like driving into a tunnel. The road got narrower and narrower. After about a mile, the deep ruts in the mud were scraping the undercarriage of my SUV. I couldn't turn around, even if I wanted to. There wasn't an inch of clearance on either side of the car. Just sheer rock and thick brush. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Just a little further, I muttered to myself. Then, the car lurched forward and sank. The front left tire plunged into a massive, water-filled sinkhole hidden in the mud. The engine whined as the tires spun uselessly, kicking up brown sludge. I was completely, hopelessly stuck. I threw the car into park, cursing loudly. I grabbed my phone, still no service. I rolled the window down an inch to assess the situation. The woods were dead silent, not even the sound of birds. Then, I heard it. The crunch of heavy tires on gravel coming from behind me. I looked in the rearview mirror. Rounding the bend of the dirt road, entirely blocking my only exit, was a rusted, Frankenstein-looking tow truck. It didn't have any company logos, just a heavy winch on the front and mismatched doors. It pulled up about 10 feet behind my bumper and stopped. The headlights were blinding in the dim light. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank God, my stupid brain thought. A local with a winch. 2 men stepped out of the truck. They were huge, wearing stained Carhartt overalls and mud-caked boots. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They just walked slowly toward my car. I cracked my window down a bit more. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound friendly. "I hit a sinkhole. Can you guys pull me out?" The taller man reached my driver's side window. He had a thick, unkempt beard and eyes that were completely flat and devoid of any empathy. He looked at the county logo on the door of my car, then looked at me. "You're on a private road, little lady," he said. His voice was a deep, rumbling drawl. "I'm sorry," I said, my heart starting to flutter. I followed the detour sign on the state road. The man actually smiled. It was a terrifying, humorless grin. "Ain't no detour. The county ain't been up that road in 10 years. We put that tree there." My stomach dropped into a bottomless pit. This wasn't an accident. It was a trap. "Look," I said, my voice trembling, fumbling for the automatic lock button on my door armrest. "I don't have any money. I just want to leave." "We don't want your money," the other man said, walking around to the front of my car. He was carrying a massive, heavy-duty pry bar. "We want the car. Good parts on a county Ford. Nobody tracks them." "I'm locked in here," I screamed, hitting the lock button. The tall man at my window didn't flinch. "You can get out, or we can take you out with the engine block. Makes no difference to us." The man at the front of the car suddenly slammed the heavy pry bar straight down onto the hood of my SUV. The metal crunched violently. I screamed, scrambling backward over the center console into the back seat. The pry bar hit the windshield, sending a spider web of cracks across the safety glass. They weren't trying to scare me. They were literally dismantling the vehicle with me inside of it. I realized with pure, horrifying clarity that if they got into this car, I was never going to be seen again. They lived out here. They knew the land. I was just another piece of salvage. I didn't wait for the glass to break. I grabbed the heavy metal tactical flashlight I kept in the back seat for appraisals, threw open the rear passenger door, and practically dove out into the mud. "Hey!" the tall man yelled, lunging around the back of the car. I didn't look back. I scrambled up the steep, muddy embankment on the side of the road and threw myself into the dense, thorny brush of the Appalachian forest. I ran blindly. The thorns tore at my face, my jacket, my hands. I slipped on wet leaves and tumbled down a steep ravine, rolling until I slammed hard into the trunk of a massive pine tree. I lost my breath, but I didn't make a sound. I scrambled behind the trunk and curled into a ball, clutching the flashlight. Up on the road, I could hear them shouting. "Leave her! She'll freeze to death out there anyway. Get the winch on the axle!" I sat in the freezing mud of that ravine for 7 hours. The sun went down, plunging the woods into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. The temperature dropped into the low 30s. I listened to the sounds of their tools, the grinding of metal, the whining of the winch, as they systematically stripped my county vehicle bare. Sometime around midnight, I heard their rusted truck start up and drive away. I didn't move until the sun came up. When dawn broke, I hiked for 5 hours using the moss on the trees for direction until I stumbled onto a paved logging road. A timber trucker found me walking like a zombie and called the state police. They found the shell of the Ford Escape on the dirt road. It had been completely gutted. The engine, the tires, the seats, everything was gone. They never found the men. The state police told me that organized chop shops operate deep in the hollers, using fake detours to trap tourists, delivery drivers, and appraisers. I quit my job the next week. I moved to the suburbs of Columbus. I don't drive outside of the city limits anymore, and if a road is blocked, I turn around and go home. Story 3. The Inherited Cabin. Call me Mark. When my grandfather passed away in early 2026, he left me a 50-acre plot of land and a small, rustic cabin deep in the mountains of southern West Virginia. It was entirely off the grid. No running water, no electricity, just a wood stove, a hand pump, and a whole lot of silence. The property had sat empty for over 2 years while the estate was tied up in probate. In October, I decided to drive up there alone for the weekend. The plan was to clear out his old belongings, board up the windows, and prep the place to be sold to a logging company. I arrived on a Friday afternoon. The drive up the mountain was brutal, but the cabin itself was beautiful. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by towering black walnut trees. It was the definition of isolated. The nearest paved road was a 40-minute drive down the mountain. I unlocked the heavy padlock on the front door, carried my supplies inside, and spent the daylight hours sweeping out the dust, chopping firewood, and getting a fire going in the cast iron stove. It was incredibly peaceful. I made a pot of coffee on my camping stove, read a book by the fire, and listened to the absolute silence of the woods. The weirdness started on Saturday morning. I woke up, grabbed a cup of coffee, and walked out onto the back porch to take a leak. About 30 yards into the tree line, I noticed something shiny strapped to the trunk of a pine tree. I walked over to check it out. It was a trail camera, a heavy-duty, camouflage, motion-activated camera. Now, trail cameras are incredibly common in the woods for hunters. But what made my stomach drop was the positioning. The camera wasn't pointed out into the woods to catch deer on a game trail. It was pointed directly at the back door of my cabin. Someone had been monitoring the house. I opened the casing of the camera. The SD card was missing. Someone had been here recently, retrieved the footage, and left the camera. My logical brain was screaming at me to pack my bags, get in my truck, and go back to Pittsburgh. But the male ego is a tragically stupid thing. I rationalized it. I told myself it's just local kids, or maybe a neighbor making sure nobody vandalizes the place. I have a legal right to be here. I'm a grown man. I'm not running away from a camera. I took the camera down, threw it in the bed of my truck, and went back to work clearing out the cabin. That was the stupidest decision of my entire life. Night fell. The darkness in those mountains is absolute. There is no light pollution, no moon that night. Just an inky black void pressing against the cabin windows. Around 11 p.m., I was sitting on the old sofa, reading by the light of a battery-powered camping lantern. The fire in the stove had died down to glowing embers. Then, out of the dead silence, came a sound that made every hair on my arms stand straight up. 3 sharp, distinct knocks on the solid wood front door. I froze. I was miles away from anyone. Nobody knew I was here. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering in my throat. I grabbed the heavy iron fire poker from the hearth. I crept toward the door and peered through the small, dirty peephole. Standing on the porch, illuminated by the faint glow of the lantern light bleeding through the window, was a woman. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, wearing a thin, torn hoodie. She looked terrified. "Please," she cried, her voice muffled through the wood. "My truck overheated down the mountain. I've been walking for hours. Please, it's freezing. Can I just use your landline to call my boyfriend?" Now, I want you to put yourself in my shoes. Everything in my body told me it was a trap. But looking through that glass, seeing a young girl shivering in 30-degree weather, the guilt overrode my instinct. I didn't have a landline, but I thought maybe I could let her sit by the fire while I drove her to town. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. "Come in, hurry," I said. She stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, her entire demeanor changed. The shivering stopped. The terrified look vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating scan of the room. She looked at my camping gear, my wallet on the table, and the keys to my truck. "I don't have a phone," I said, gripping the fire poker tightly. "But I can drive you down." She didn't answer me. She just smiled. Then, she turned her head toward the open front door and whistled. A sharp, loud, piercing whistle. Before I could even react to slam the door, two men burst out from the darkness of the porch. They were massive. They wore heavy, grimy coats, their faces hardened and aggressive. They pushed past the girl and rushed straight at me. These weren't stranded motorists. These were squatters. They had been using the cabin while it was abandoned. When I showed up and changed the locks, they saw my truck, they saw my gear, and they decided they were going to take it all. The girl was just the bait to get the door open. "Get on the floor," the first man screamed, pulling a large hunting knife from his belt. Adrenaline is a terrifying drug. I didn't get on the floor. I swung the iron fire poker with every ounce of strength I had in my body. The heavy iron caught the first man square across the jaw. The sound of the impact was sickening. He dropped like a sack of concrete, blood instantly pooling on the wooden floorboards. The second man roared in anger and lunged at me. I shoved the heavy wooden table into his path, knocking him off balance. I didn't try to fight anymore. I knew I couldn't win. I turned and sprinted for the back door. The girl tried to block me, clawing at my jacket, but I threw my shoulder into her chest, sending her crashing into the wood stove. I hit the back door, tore open the deadbolt, and threw myself out into the freezing Appalachian night. "Get him!" I heard the man screaming from inside the cabin. I didn't go for my truck. I knew they would expect that, and I didn't have my keys. I ran straight into the dense, black forest. I ran blindly in the pitch dark. Branches whipped my face, drawing blood. I tripped over unseen rocks, twisting my ankle, but the pure, unadulterated terror kept me moving. Behind me, I could hear the man crashing through the brush, cursing violently, the beam of a high-powered flashlight sweeping through the trees. I found a deep, dried-out creek bed and threw myself into it, burying my body under a pile of dead, wet leaves and rotting logs. I laid there in the freezing dirt, holding my breath until my lungs burned. I watched the beam of the flashlight sweep over my hiding spot. I heard his heavy boots crunching on the leaves just 10 feet away. "You can't hide out here, city boy," he yelled into the dark. "This is our mountain. You're dead." He searched for over an hour. Eventually, the cold drove him back to the cabin. I stayed buried in that creek bed until the sun came up the next morning. When I finally crawled out, I was borderline hypothermic. I hiked 6 miles through the dense woods, completely avoiding the dirt roads, until I reached the main highway and flagged down a passing state trooper. When the police heavily armed themselves and went up to the cabin, it was completely empty. My truck was gone. My gear was gone. Even the fire poker was gone. The only thing left behind was a massive pool of blood on the floorboards where I had hit the first man. The cops told me that organized groups of displaced, desperate people had essentially colonized the deep woods. They operate completely off the grid, claiming abandoned properties as their own territory. I signed the property over to the logging company the very next day. I took a massive loss on it, and I didn't care. I will never set foot in the Appalachian Mountains again. Because I learned that out there, in the deep hollows where the law doesn't reach, you are not at the top of the food chain. If you take anything away from these stories, let it be this. In places where the law doesn't reach, isolation is a weapon, and your empathy can be a fatal weakness. Before you go, head down to the comments and tell me, Which of these 3 Appalachian nightmares terrified you the most? Have you ever taken a wrong turn on a rural road and ended up somewhere sketchy? Sound off below. Let's get a discussion going. If you have your own true, terrifying encounters from the deep woods, send them to the email in the description below. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe to Creepy Digest. Sleep well and stay on the paved roads.